The training hall on Varus Prime was the largest building Danny Brooks had ever seen in his life. The ceiling stretched so high above his head that clouds actually formed near the top on humid days. He stood next to his partner Maria Santos and looked around at the dozens of alien species filling the rows of seats around them. Some had scales. Some had feathers. Some looked like walking crystals. One species in the corner appeared to be made entirely of floating gas held together by some kind of energy field. Danny had been in space for only 3 months, and he still could not believe this was his life. Now, Commander Zilthax entered the room through a door that seemed to grow out of the wall itself. He was a tall creature with shimmering blue scales and 4 slender arms that moved independently of each other. His eyes were compound like an insect, and they reflected the light in hundreds of tiny fragments. He walked to the raised platform at the front of the room and looked out at the assembled recruits. His gaze moved across the room and stopped when it reached the 2 humans sitting near the back row. Danny noticed the pause. He had been getting a lot of those pauses since arriving at the academy. Humans were new to the Galactic Alliance, and most species had never seen one before. Some of them seemed fascinated. Others seemed confused. A few seemed almost scared, though Danny could not understand why. Humans were not particularly large or strong or fast compared to most of the species here. They did not have claws or fangs or natural armor. They were just regular people as far as Danny was concerned. The commander began speaking, and the translator device in Danny's ear converted the clicking sounds into words he could understand. Today's lesson would focus on toxicology. The commander explained that planetary surveyors would encounter many dangerous creatures during their careers. Some of these creatures produced venom that could kill in moments. It was essential for all surveyors to recognize these threats and avoid them at all costs. A holographic image appeared in the center of the room. It showed a small creature covered in soft fur with 6 legs and 2 large eyes that seemed almost cute. The alien sitting next to Danny made a gasping sound and pulled away from the image as if it might jump out and attack. Several other species in the room had similar reactions. The crystal beings began vibrating with what Danny assumed was fear. The gas creatures in the corner compressed themselves into tight balls. Commander Zilthax explained that this creature was called a Valaxian stinger. It lived on 7 different worlds in the outer regions of known space. Its venom attacked the nervous system with incredible speed. A single sting from this creature could deliver enough poison to kill most sentient species in approximately 3 seconds. The commander emphasized that number. 3 seconds. He let it hang in the air while the recruits shifted nervously in their seats. Danny leaned toward Maria and whispered that the thing looked like a bumblebee crossed with a hamster. Maria covered her mouth to hide her smile. She whispered back that she was thinking the same thing. The creature was honestly kind of adorable in her opinion. Commander Zilthax noticed their exchange. His compound eyes focused on them with an intensity that made Danny straighten in his seat. The commander asked if the human recruits had something they wished to share with the rest of the class. His tone made it clear this was not really a question. Danny cleared his throat and apologized. He explained that he meant no disrespect. It was just that the creature in the hologram reminded him of something from back home. The commander asked what he meant by that. Danny said that on Earth they had insects called bees that could sting people and inject venom. The effect was similar to what the commander described, though perhaps not quite as fast. Getting stung hurt quite a bit, but most humans recovered without any serious problems. The room went completely silent. Every eye and sensor and optical organ in the hall turned toward Danny. The crystal beings stopped vibrating. The gas creatures expanded back to their normal size. Commander Zilthax stood perfectly still with all 4 of his arms frozen in mid-gesture. Maria decided to help explain. She pulled out her personal data pad and began listing some of the venomous creatures found on Earth. There were bees and wasps and hornets. There were scorpions in the deserts. There were spiders of many different varieties, some of which had venom that could cause serious tissue damage. There were snakes on almost every continent with venom that could kill if not treated. There were jellyfish in the oceans with tentacles that delivered agonizing stings. There were even some mammals that produced venom, which most species in the galaxy apparently found very strange. Commander Zilthax asked how humans survived on a world with so many venomous creatures. Danny shrugged and said they just dealt with it. People got stung and bitten sometimes. It was painful and occasionally dangerous, but humans had learned to treat most types of envenomation. They had developed medicines called antivenoms that could counteract the effects. They had learned which creatures to avoid and how to respond if contact occurred. The commander asked Danny to describe a personal experience with venomous creatures. Danny thought for a moment and then told the story of when he was 6 years old and stepped on a wasp nest in his backyard. He got stung 11 times before he managed to run away. His mother gave him some medicine and put ice on the stings. He was swollen and uncomfortable for a few days, but he went back to school by the end of the week. The alien sitting next to Danny made a sound that the translator interpreted as extreme distress. The creature asked how Danny could speak so calmly about being poisoned 11 times in a single incident. Danny explained that wasp stings were not usually that dangerous for humans. They hurt and they swelled up, but the body could handle the venom in small doses. It was only really dangerous if someone had an allergic reaction or got stung hundreds of times, Commander. Zilthax slowly lowered his forearms to his sides. He looked at the holographic image of the Valaxian stinger still floating in the center of the room. Then he looked back at the two humans sitting calmly in the back row. He had been teaching at this academy for over 30 years. He had trained thousands of surveyors from dozens of species. He thought he understood the dangers of the galaxy better than most. Now he was beginning to realize that he understood nothing about the planet called Earth or the impossible creatures it had produced. The commander reached out and deactivated the hologram. He announced that the lesson plan would need to be adjusted. He had many more questions for the human recruits. The class would need to learn exactly what kind of world had produced beings who considered deadly venom to be a minor inconvenience. Danny and Maria exchanged a glance. They had a feeling this was going to be a long day. 1 week after the first toxicology class, the entire curriculum had been completely reorganized. Commander Zilthax had abandoned his original lesson plans and replaced them with something unprecedented in the history of the Academy. The class was now dedicated to studying the biological horrors of a single planet. That planet was Earth. Danny Brooks sat at the front of the room next to Maria Santos. They had been moved from the back row because the other recruits kept interrupting the lessons to ask them questions. It was easier for everyone if the humans were positioned where they could respond quickly. Commander Zilthax stood to the side taking notes on his datapad. He had stopped trying to teach and had become a student himself. Crix was a Moravian, which meant their body was made of living crystal that pulsed with different colors depending on their emotional state. Right now, Crix was glowing a deep shade of orange, which Danny had learned meant confusion mixed with disbelief. Crix asked the humans to explain once again about the substance called capsaicin. They had encountered the term in their research, but could not understand what they had read. Maria explained that capsaicin was a chemical produced by certain plants on Earth called chili peppers. The chemical caused a burning sensation when it contacted skin or mucous membranes. It triggered pain receptors and created the feeling of intense heat, even though no actual burning was occurring. Many species would classify such a substance as a chemical weapon because it could incapacitate victims through pain alone. Crix asked why humans would ever come into contact with such a dangerous substance. Maria smiled and explained that humans consumed it on purpose. They added it to their food to make it taste better. Some humans actively sought out the most potent varieties of chili peppers, specifically because they caused more intense burning sensations. There were competitions where people tried to eat the hottest peppers they could find. The room erupted in sounds of shock and confusion. The translator in Danny's ear worked overtime trying to convert all the alien exclamations into something comprehensible. He caught phrases like impossible and self-destructive behavior and possible mental instability. Commander Zilthax raised all 4 of his arms to quiet the class. Danny tried to explain further. He said that humans had developed a strange relationship with capsaicin over thousands of years. Their bodies had adapted to tolerate it, and their brains had learned to interpret the pain signals as something almost pleasurable. It was hard to explain to someone who had never experienced it. He compared it to how some species enjoyed activities that others found terrifying, like the Moravians, who liked to expose themselves to specific frequencies of light that caused their crystal structures to vibrate intensely. Cricks made a chiming sound that indicated acceptance of the explanation, though they still looked troubled by the whole concept. Their crystal body had shifted from orange to a pale yellow, which meant they were processing new information that conflicted with their existing understanding of reality. Then was a member of an amphibious species from a water world called Callus 4. They had gills on the sides of their neck, and their skin was covered in a thin layer of protective slime that kept it moist. Then had been particularly interested in learning about Earth's oceans, which covered most of the planet's surface. They asked Danny and Maria to tell them more about the box jellyfish. Maria pulled up an image on the holographic display. The creature looked almost beautiful in a terrifying way. It had a transparent body shaped like a cube, with long trailing tentacles that could extend several meters. She explained that the box jellyfish was one of the most venomous creatures on Earth. Its tentacles contained millions of tiny stinging cells that fired on contact. The venom attacked the heart and nervous system and skin simultaneously. A severe sting could kill a human in just a few minutes if they did not receive immediate treatment. Then asked if humans avoided the waters where these creatures lived. Maria shook her head. She explained that many humans lived in coastal regions where box jellyfish were common. They continued to swim and surf and fish in those waters. Some wore protective suits, but many did not. Deaths occurred every year, but most people accepted the risk as part of living near the ocean. The amphibian made a bubbling sound that the translator interpreted as profound horror. Then said that on Callus 4, any body of water containing a creature of such danger would be permanently sealed and marked with warning beacons. The idea of voluntarily entering such waters was beyond their comprehension. Danny explained that humans had a complicated relationship with danger. They acknowledged it and they tried to minimize it, but they did not let it stop them from doing what they wanted to do. People climbed mountains where they could fall to their death. They jumped out of aircraft with only fabric parachutes to slow their descent. They drove vehicles at high speeds on roads shared with thousands of other vehicles. Risk was simply part of human existence. Commander Zilthax spoke up for the first time in nearly an hour. He said that he had been researching Earth fauna since the humans arrived, and he had encountered something in the database that he needed them to explain. He pronounced the name slowly and carefully. Inland Taipan. Danny let out a low whistle. He said that the commander had found one of the heavy hitters. The inland taipan was a snake native to the continent of Australia. It was widely considered to possess the most toxic venom of any land snake on Earth. A single bite contained enough venom to kill approximately 100 adult humans. The venom attacked blood cells and muscle tissue and the nervous system all at once. The room fell into absolute silence. Several species stopped moving entirely. One of the gas creatures in the corner became so compressed with fear that it nearly collapsed into a solid state. Maria added some context. She said that despite its incredible toxicity, the inland taipan had never actually killed a human in recorded history. The snake was shy and lived in remote areas far from human habitation. When encounters did occur, the snake usually tried to escape rather than attack. Additionally, humans had developed an anti-venom that could counteract the effects if treatment was administered quickly enough. A small creature named Wick spoke up from the third row. Wick was a sketh, which meant they stood only about half a meter tall and had 6 limbs that could function as either arms or legs depending on the situation. Wick said they had read about another Earth creature that confused them greatly. They asked about the platypus. Danny actually laughed at that one. He explained that the platypus was one of the strangest animals on Earth, even by human standards. It had a bill like a duck and a tail like a beaver, and it laid eggs like a reptile. But it was actually classified as a mammal because it had fur and produced milk for its young. And just to make things even more confusing, the males had venomous spurs on their hind legs that could cause extreme pain to anything they kicked. Wick made a clicking sound that conveyed complete bewilderment. They said that Earth appeared to be a planet that could not decide what kind of creatures it wanted to produce. It seemed like evolution had simply thrown together random combinations of traits without any coherent plan. Maria said that was actually a pretty accurate description of how evolution worked. Life on Earth had been developing for billions of years through a process of random mutation and natural selection. The creatures that survived were not necessarily the most logical or well-designed. They were simply the ones that happened to be good enough at surviving and reproducing. Commander Zilthax saved his notes and addressed the class. He said that they would continue these discussions in future sessions, but he wanted everyone to understand something important. The humans were not exaggerating about their planet. Every claim they made had been verified through independent research. Earth was genuinely one of the most dangerous worlds in the known galaxy, and the humans were the species that had emerged dominant from that environment. He looked at Danny, and Maria with something like respect in his compound eyes. He said that when the humans first arrived at the academy, he had thought they were among the weakest recruits he had ever trained. Now he was beginning to understand that he had been looking at them entirely wrong. Danny and Maria walked out of the classroom together when the session ended. They had grown used to the stares and whispers from other species in the hallways. Being seen as dangerous was strange for both of them. They had never thought of themselves that way. They were just regular people from a regular planet doing their best to get through life. But maybe that was exactly the point. On Earth, surviving was just what everyone did without thinking about it. Now they were learning that simply surviving on Earth was an accomplishment most of the galaxy could never match. The training vessel dropped out of faster than light travel with a shudder that Danny felt in his bones. He stood at the observation window and looked down at the planet below. It was called Nexus 7, and it was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were. The surface was covered in thick jungle that glowed with bioluminescent plants in shades of purple and blue. Rivers of silver water cut through the vegetation like veins on a living body. From orbit, it looked like paradise. Commander Zilthax gathered the recruits in the briefing room and explained what they would be facing. Nexus 7 was classified as a Category 4 hazard world, which meant it was as dangerous as almost any planet they would encounter in their careers. The atmosphere was breathable, but thick with spores from fungal organisms that could cause respiratory problems in many species. The water was contaminated with microscopic parasites that could burrow into flesh and reproduce. And the wildlife was among the most lethal in the known galaxy. The commander pulled up an image of a small creature that looked like a bright red frog with too many eyes. He said this was the Nexarian dart frog, and it had killed 6 surveyors in the past decade. Its skin secreted a contact poison that could kill most species in approximately 4 seconds. Even touching the creature with a gloved hand was dangerous, because the toxin could eat through many common materials. Danny looked at Maria and she looked back at him. They were both thinking the same thing, but neither of them wanted to be the one to say it again. The class had gotten used to their reactions by now, but it still felt strange to keep comparing every alien horror to something from back home. Commander Zilthax noticed their exchange. He asked if the humans had something to add about this creature. Danny said they had a similar animal on Earth called the golden poison dart frog. It was small and brightly colored as a warning to predators. The toxins in its skin were powerful enough that a single frog contained enough poison to kill 10 to 20 adult humans. Indigenous peoples in certain regions had learned to extract the poison and apply it to the tips of hunting darts, which was where the name came from. The other recruits had stopped reacting with shock to these revelations. Now they simply looked at the humans with a kind of resigned acceptance. Of course, Earth had deadly frogs. Of course, humans had figured out how to use the poison as a weapon. Nothing about that planet surprised them anymore. The commander divided the recruits into 2 teams for the field exercise. Danny would lead Team 1, which included Crix and 3 other recruits from various species. Maria would lead Team 2 with Then and Wick and 2 others. The objective was simple. They would descend to the surface and travel through the jungle to a central clearing. They would collect biological samples and environmental data. Then they would return to the landing zone and evacuate. No contact with local wildlife was permitted. They were there to observe and document only. The descent shuttles broke through the atmosphere and landed in a small cleared area near the edge of the jungle. Danny stepped out first and immediately felt the humidity wrap around him like a wet blanket. The air was thick and warm and smelled of vegetation and decay. Strange sounds echoed from the trees. Some were musical and almost pleasant. Others were harsh and alien and made the hair on his arms stand up. Team 1 moved into the jungle in a careful formation. Danny took point because his senses were apparently better suited to detecting threats than most of the other species. Crix walked behind him, their crystal body casting faint rainbows as light filtered through the canopy above. The other team members followed with their sensors and collection equipment ready. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. They moved slowly and carefully through the undergrowth. They documented several species of plants and animals from a safe distance. They collected air and soil samples without incident. Danny was beginning to think the mission would be uneventful. Then Crix made a sound like breaking glass and collapsed. Danny spun around and saw the Moravian on the ground. Their crystal body was pulsing with erratic colors. Red and black and sickly yellow flashed across their surface in patterns that looked wrong. Danny dropped to his knees beside Crix and asked what happened. Crix managed to explain through obvious pain. They had brushed against a plant and felt something pierce their outer layer. A thorn or spine of some kind had broken off inside their crystal matrix. They could feel something spreading through their structure. Something toxic. Danny activated his communicator and reported the situation to Commander Zilthax on the ship. The commander pulled up Crix's vital signs and his voice became urgent. He said the toxin was a crystalline corruption agent. It was spreading through Crix's body and would reach their core matrix within minutes. Once that happened, there would be no saving them. The commander ordered immediate evacuation. Danny looked at the jungle around them. The landing zone was at least 40 minutes away at normal pace. They could never make it in time if they carried Crix, and the Moravian was in no condition to move on their own. He made a decision. He told the commander they were too far from the landing zone. He was going to try something else. The commander demanded to know what he was planning, but Danny had already handed his communicator to another team member. He knelt beside Crix and examined the wound. He could see the thorn embedded in their crystalline flesh. Dark corruption was spraying outward from the point of entry like cracks in ice. The toxin was visible as a murky discoloration moving through what should have been clear crystal. Danny reached out with his bare hands and began working to extract the thorn. Crix made a horrified sound and asked what he was doing. Danny said he was going to remove the source of the contamination and cut away the infected material before it could spread further. The other team members protested. They said he was exposing himself to an unknown toxin without any protection. The thorn could kill him just as easily as it was killing Crix. Danny kept working as he answered. He said the toxin had already punctured his skin when he grabbed the thorn. He could feel the burning sensation starting in his palm, but he could also tell this was a protein-based venom similar to many earth snake toxins. His body would react, and it would hurt, but he had time. He extracted the thorn and threw it aside. Then he did something that made everyone watching freeze in horror. He used his bare fingers to break away the corrupted sections of Crix's crystal body. He was essentially performing surgery with his hands while poison spread through his own bloodstream. Commander Zilthax watched through the team's camera feeds from the ship above. He had never seen anything like this. The human was calmly removing infected tissue while his own hands swelled visibly from the toxin. His vital signs showed elevated heart rate and signs of systemic distress, but his movements remained steady and precise. Danny finished his work and sat back on his heels. Crix's vital signs were stabilizing. The corruption had stopped spreading. The Moravian would need proper medical treatment, but they would survive. Maria's team arrived, minutes later having heard the emergency transmission. She took one look at Danny's swollen purple hand and sighed. She said she could not leave him alone for 1 hour without him finding a way to get poisoned. Danny smiled weakly and said it was a gift. By the time they got back to the ship, Danny's hand had swollen to nearly twice its normal size. The ship's medical officer was a physician named Colas, who had never treated a human before. He ran scan after scan, unable to believe what he was seeing. The toxin should have killed Danny. His tissue was damaged and his blood was contaminated. But his heart kept beating, and his body was already beginning to fight off the poison. Danny asked if they had any antihistamines. Colas did not know what that word meant. Danny tried to explain. It was a type of medicine humans used to reduce allergic and inflammatory responses. Very common back home. Almost everyone had some in their bathroom cabinet. Commander Zilthax stood in the doorway of the medical bay watching the scene. He had trained surveyors for 30 years. He had seen bravery, and he had seen foolishness, and he had seen sacrifice. But he had never seen someone calmly accept being poisoned because saving a teammate was more important than their own safety. He asked Danny why he had done it, why he had risked his life without hesitation. Danny looked at him with tired eyes and gave an answer that Zilthax would remember for the rest of his life. Danny said that when he was 12 years old, his uncle got bitten by a venomous snake called a copperhead. His uncle stayed calm and kept the bite below his heart and walked 2 miles to the nearest road to get help. He survived because he did not panic. That day, Danny learned that fear kills faster than most poisons. The trick was to acknowledge the danger and then do what needed to be done anyway. Crix was recovering in the next bed. Their crystal body was missing a section where Danny had removed the corruption, but new crystal was already beginning to grow to fill the gap. They looked at the human who had saved their life and asked how they could ever repay him. Danny said they could buy him a drink when they got back to the academy. Crix made a chiming sound that might have been laughter. They said humans were the strangest creatures they had ever met. Danny could not argue with that. 6 months had passed since Danny and Maria first arrived at the academy on Varus Prime. In that time, everything had changed. More humans had joined the surveyor program, and each one brought their own stories of surviving on Earth. The tale spread through the student body and beyond into the wider alliance. Species that had never heard of humans before now spoke of them in hushed tones as if discussing mythical creatures from ancient legends. Commander Zilthax had been promoted to lead a newly created division called Human Integration. He had not requested the position, but he had come to embrace it. His task was to study human biology and psychology and figure out how to incorporate their unique capabilities into the Alliance's operations. It was the most challenging and rewarding work of his career. He stood before a gathering of senior officers in the main briefing hall of Alliance headquarters. Admiral Vorks sat at the head of the table. The Admiral was an elderly Sketh who had led the Academy for nearly a century. His small body was frail, but his 6 eyes remained sharp, and his mind was as keen as ever. The other officers represented various divisions and species throughout the Alliance command structure. Zilthax activated the holographic display and began his presentation. He announced that the results had arrived from the Alliance Medical Council after months of study and analysis. Humans were now officially classified as a Category 2 resistant species. Admiral Vorks leaned forward in his hover chair. He said there were only 4 species in the entire Alliance with that classification. All of them were known for their extraordinary survival capabilities. One was a silicon-based life form that could survive in volcanic environments. Another was a species of living metal that was effectively immune to most chemical agents. The other 2 had evolved on worlds almost as harsh as Earth. Zilthax confirmed the classification was correct. The data was irrefutable. He explained that humans demonstrated remarkable resistance to a wide spectrum of biological and chemical threats. Their immune systems were extraordinarily aggressive and could neutralize many toxins that would kill other species almost instantly. Their bodies could heal from injuries that would be permanently debilitating for most life forms. They could survive in temperature ranges and atmospheric conditions that would be lethal to the majority of known species. Commander Threll was a Moravian senior officer whose crystal body pulsed with curious blue light. She asked how such a species could have evolved. What conditions could possibly produce beings with such extreme durability? Zilthax changed the display to show a rotating image of Earth. He said the answer was their homeworld. The planet appeared beautiful from space with its blue oceans and white clouds and green continents. But appearances were deceiving. Earth was what xenobiologists were now calling a death world. The term caused murmurs throughout the room. It was not used lightly. A death world was a planet where conditions were so hostile that only the most adaptable and resilient life forms could survive. Such planets were rare because most life that evolved on them simply died out. Before achieving sapience, Zilthax continued his explanation. The evolutionary pressures on Earth had been extraordinary. The planet had experienced multiple mass extinction events that wiped out the majority of species alive at the time. Climate had swung between extreme ice ages and tropical heat waves. Continents had shifted and merged and broken apart. Predators and prey had been locked in a constant arms race, developing ever more deadly weapons and defenses. Every creature on Earth had been engaged in a chemical and biological war for hundreds of millions of years. Plants developed poisons to avoid being eaten. Animals developed resistance to those poisons and their own toxins to hunt prey. Bacteria and viruses constantly evolved new ways to infect hosts, and hosts constantly evolved new ways to fight them off. It was an endless cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation that had produced some of the deadliest organisms in the known galaxy. Humans were simply the species that had survived long enough to develop intelligence. They were not the strongest creatures on their world, or the fastest, or the most venomous. But they were arguably the most adaptable. Their bodies could tolerate temperature extremes from freezing cold to scorching heat. Their digestive systems could process an enormous variety of foods, including many that would be toxic to other species. Their immune systems were battle-hardened from millennia of fighting off pathogens. And most importantly, their minds could recognize threats and develop strategies to overcome them. Admiral Vorks asked if Zilthax was saying that humans were apex predators from a death world. Zilthax paused before answering. He said they were more than apex predators. They were apex survivors. Their bodies had evolved to endure toxins and recover from injuries and adapt to conditions that would exterminate most other species. They consumed neurotoxins for pleasure and called it adding spice to their food. They kept venomous creatures as pets and called it a hobby. They willingly exposed themselves to harmful radiation to change the color of their skin and called it getting a tan. A voice interrupted from the doorway. Danny Brooks and Maria Santos stood at the entrance, having arrived for their final certification ceremony. Danny said that last one about tanning was actually considered pretty unhealthy, and most humans knew they should avoid it. They could not help but overhear the discussion as they approached. Admiral Vorks gestured for them to enter. He said they had completed their training with exceptional marks. Their performance on Nexus 7 had been studied by every surveyor team in the fleet. The incident where Danny saved his Moravian teammate had become required viewing in emergency response courses. Before granting their certifications, the Admiral had one question for them. He asked if all humans were like them. So durable, so resistant, so willing to face danger. Danny and Maria exchanged one of their looks that Zilthax had learned to recognize. It usually preceded something that would make everyone else in the room uncomfortable. Danny said they were actually pretty average by human standards. There were people back home who made them look like amateurs. He mentioned firefighters who ran into burning buildings to save strangers. He talked about free divers who held their breath for more than 20 minutes while swimming to extreme depths. He described mountain climbers who scaled peaks so high that the air did not contain enough oxygen to sustain life. These people did such things voluntarily, and many of them considered it fun. Admiral Vorks made a whistling sound that indicated overwhelming amusement in his species. He said the Alliance had been searching for the perfect surveyor species for centuries. They needed beings who could explore hostile worlds and survive long enough to gather useful data. And all this time, such beings had been hiding on a death world in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy, eating poison for breakfast and wrestling venomous snakes for entertainment. Maria clarified that they did not really wrestle snakes. While most of them did not, there were some television programs back home that featured exactly that kind of activity. But those were produced by people who were considered eccentric, even by human standards. Commander Zilthax stepped forward, holding two gleaming certification badges. They were made of an alloy that could withstand almost any environmental condition. They would last for centuries without degrading. He said it was his honor to present them. Danny and Maria were now fully qualified Alliance planetary surveyors. He wished them successful missions and safe returns. They accepted their badges with genuine pride visible in their expressions. Danny asked where their first assignment would be. He was eager to get started. Zilthax allowed himself a small smile. He had learned the expression from his human students over the past months. He said there was a world in the Outer Rim that had resisted all surveyor attempts. Every team sent to explore had been forced to retreat. The indigenous life forms were considered too dangerous for any known species to approach safely. Maria asked what made it so dangerous. Zilthax explained that the atmosphere was slightly acidic and the water was contaminated with heavy metals. The dominant life forms produced a toxin that could kill a Moravian in less than 2 seconds. 3 previous surveyor teams had barely escaped with their lives. Danny looked at Maria. She looked back at him. They were both grinning. Danny said it sounded like camping in a place back home called Australia. Maria said she was thinking more of a region called Florida. Both of them laughed at what was apparently some kind of private joke. They walked out of the briefing room, together already discussing their approach to the mission. Admiral Vorks watched them go. He said to Zilfax that he finally understood why the Council had been so eager to bring humans into the Alliance. They were not just another species. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. Zilfax agreed. He said the universe was vast and filled with dangers. But now they had allies who looked at those dangers and saw opportunities. Beings who had been forged by a world that tried to kill them every single day, and who had emerged stronger because of it. The era of human exploration was just beginning. Zilfax had a feeling the galaxy would never be the same. 10 years had passed since Danny Brooks and Maria Santos became the first human surveyors in the Galactic Alliance. A decade that had transformed everything the galaxy knew about exploration and survival. Danny stood on the observation deck of the Alliance flagship Endurance watching. Stars streaked past in long lines of light as the ship traveled, faster than light toward its destination. Commander. Zilfax stood beside him. The years had treated the old instructor kindly. His scales now shimmered with silver undertones that marked advanced age in his species. His forearms moved a little more slowly than they once had, but his compound eyes were still sharp, and his mind remained as curious as ever. Zilfax asked Danny if he remembered his first day at the academy. Danny said he remembered it clearly. The commander had shown them a picture of that fuzzy creature and explained how its venom could kill in 3 seconds. Danny admitted he had wanted to laugh, but had been too polite to do so. Zilfax acknowledged that he had seen the amusement in Danny's eyes even if he had not expressed it openly. He admitted that in that moment he had been terrified of the humans. He thought they were either lying about their experiences or suffering from some form of mental instability. No sane species could be so casual about deadly toxins. Danny asked what? Zilfax thought now after 10 years of working with humans. The old commander considered the question carefully before answering. He said he now understood that humans were not fearless. That was a common misconception among other species. Humans felt fear just as intensely as anyone else. The difference was in what they did with that fear. Most species encountered danger and retreated. Humans encountered danger and studied it. They learned its patterns and weaknesses. They developed countermeasures and treatments. And then they walked toward it anyway because there was something on the other side. They wanted to reach Dot. It was not the absence of fear. It was the refusal to let fear make their decisions for them. Zilfax said it was the most remarkable adaptation he had ever observed in any species. The door behind them opened, and Maria Santos entered wearing the uniform of a fleet commander. Her dark curly hair now had streaks of gray at the temples. The past decade had carved lines around her eyes, but they were the lines that came from smiling. She had led more successful exploration missions than any surveyor in Alliance history. Recently, she had been appointed to oversee all human integration efforts across the fleet. She announced that the Council had reached its decision. Starting with the next training cycle, human physiology and psychology would become required study for all surveyor candidates. They were calling it the Terran Adaptation Curriculum. Zilfax said that was appropriate. Humans had completely changed the way the Alliance approached hostile environments. Before their arrival, surveyor teams suffered catastrophic casualty rates on worlds like Nexus 7. Half a team lost was considered acceptable for a successful mission. Now, with human advisors and human training methods, those casualties had been reduced by more than 90%. Danny moved closer to the viewport and looked out at the stars rushing past. He said it was strange to think about. Back home, humans had spent most of their history believing they were fragile. They built shelters because the weather could kill them. They developed medicine because diseases could kill them. They created technology because their own physical limitations could kill them. Everything they achieved was built on the foundation of believing they needed protection from their world. Zilthax observed that they were not wrong to build those things. Earth was genuinely dangerous. The precautions humans developed were rational responses to real threats. Danny agreed, but said there was something more to it. Humans had not just survived their world. They had studied every creature that could hurt them. They had developed cures and treatments and preventive measures. They turned the knowledge of their own vulnerability into strength. And now they were out here sharing that knowledge with the entire galaxy. Maria joined them at the viewport. She said the council was also considering a new designation for Earth. They wanted to reclassify it from Death World to Forge World. Danny asked what that meant. Maria explained that a Forge World was a planet that produced species tempered by extreme conditions. Species that emerged stronger because of the challenges they faced rather than weaker. A forge created tools and weapons of great power through fire and pressure. Earth had forged humanity through poison and predators and extinction events that wiped out most other life. Zilthax made a soft clicking sound that indicated approval in his species. He said the term was appropriate. It captured something essential about human nature. They were not survivors despite their world. They were survivors because of their world. Every challenge had made them more capable of facing the next one. The ship's intercom activated with a soft chime. A voice announced that Senior Surveyor Brooks and Commander Santos should report to the briefing room. They were approaching the Catherine Nebula. The Catherine Nebula was the Alliance's current great challenge. It was a region of space filled with dozens of planets that had resisted all exploration attempts. The environments were extreme. The life forms were hostile beyond anything previously encountered. The chemical compositions were deadly to every species that had tried to set foot on those worlds. Every species. Except humans. Danny straightened his uniform and prepared to leave. But before he could go, Zilthax placed one of his 4 hands on Danny's shoulder. It was a gesture of deep respect in his culture. He said he wanted Danny to know that training him had been the greatest honor of his career. Danny and Maria and all the humans who had come after them had changed everything Zilthax believed about what was possible. Danny clasped the offered arm in return. He said Zilthax had given them a chance when everyone else thought humans were too soft for the surveyor program. That single decision had made all the difference. Without the commander's willingness to look past his initial impressions, none of this would have happened. As Danny and Maria walked toward the briefing room, they passed a group of young recruits gathered in one of the common areas. The group included a mix of species, and among them were 2 young humans. The human recruits were explaining something to their alien classmates. Danny caught fragments of the conversation as he passed. They were talking about the Sydney funnel web spider and how its venom could kill a human in 15 minutes without treatment. The other recruits looked horrified. The humans looked like they were describing a minor inconvenience. Maria asked Danny if he ever imagined they would end up here, leading exploration missions into the most dangerous regions of known space, being seen as the experts on survival, when they still felt like regular people from a regular planet. Danny said he had never really thought about it. He just wanted to see what was out there beyond Earth. He grew up looking at stars and wondering what kind of worlds orbited them. Now he knew the answer. Many of those worlds were hostile beyond anything he could have imagined. But that made them interesting rather than frightening. Maria nodded. She said she felt the same way. Every new planet was a puzzle to solve. Every danger was a problem to overcome. That was how humans had always approached challenges. Not by avoiding them, but by figuring out how to deal with them. They reached the briefing room and paused at the door. Inside, the tactical team was already assembled. Holographic projections showed the nebula and its most dangerous worlds in glowing detail. The room fell quiet as Danny and Maria entered. Every eye turned toward them with a mixture of respect and expectation. These two humans had walked into situations that should have killed them dozens of times. They had saved teammates from poisons and predators and environmental hazards that no other species could have survived. And they had done it all with the casual confidence of people who considered such challenges to be just another day at work. Danny looked at the projections and studied the first planet they would be exploring. The atmosphere was corrosive. The water was toxic. The dominant predators had killed 3 surveyor teams. It was exactly the kind of world that humans were uniquely suited to handle. He smiled and said they should get started. They had a lot of ground to cover. Back on the observation deck, Commander Zilthax remained at the viewport. He watched the stars for a long time, thinking about everything that had changed since 2 humans first walked into his classroom and made him question everything he knew about the galaxy. He returned to his quarters and sat down at his desk. For the past 10 years, he had been writing a memoir about his experiences with humanity. It had grown into something much larger than he originally intended. A record of how one species from an unremarkable world had reshaped the entire alliance. He opened the document and scrolled to the final chapter. He began to type his closing thoughts. He wrote that when the humans first arrived at the academy, he believed they were the weakest species he would ever train. They were soft and slow and seemed utterly unprepared for the dangers of the galaxy. He could not have been more wrong. Humans were not weak. They were forged. Every poison on their world had made them stronger. Every predator had made them smarter. Every disaster had made them more determined to survive. They called Earth home, but now the Alliance called it a forge world, because that was exactly what it had done.